The courthouse fell silent as Jamie Collins rose from his seat, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "He's innocent?" the 17-year-old declared, his eyes fixed on Judge Harmon's stern face. "My father didn't steal that money, and I can prove who did." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. The prosecutor, Miss B. Bennett, froze mid-sentence, her mouth hanging open in surprise. Jamie's father, David Collins, looked up from the defendant's table, his exhausted eyes suddenly wide with alarm. Even Mr. Reeves, David's defense attorney, seemed stunned by the interruption, his pen suspended above his legal pad. Judge Harmon's gavel came down with a sharp crack. "Young man, this is highly inappropriate. Sit down immediately or I'll have you removed." But Jamie remained standing, his shoulders squared despite the slight tremor in his hands. "Your Honor, please. There's evidence that hasn't been presented, evidence that shows my father was framed." The judge's eyes narrowed behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "Bailiff," he began, but David Collins rose to his feet. "Jamie, stop." David pleaded, his voice hoarse. "Just let the attorneys handle this." "Listen to your father, son," Judge Harmon warned. Jamie shook his head, his dark hair falling across his forehead. "I can't. Not when Eleanor Reynolds is sitting right there pretending she had nothing to do with this." He pointed to a sleek, silver-haired woman in the gallery who had suddenly gone very still. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Eleanor Reynolds, the chief financial officer of Quantum Dynamics, was not only David Collins' superior but also one of the prosecution's key witnesses against him.
"That's enough."
Judge Harmon's gavel came down again, harder this time. "Bailiff, remove this young man from my courtroom." As the bailiff approached, Jamie reached into his backpack and pulled out a flash drive, holding it up like a talisman. "It's all here," he said, his voice rising with desperation. "The real transfer records, the offshore accounts, everything Ms. Reynolds didn't want anyone to find." Eleanor Reynolds had risen to her feet, her face pale with something that looked remarkably like fear. "This is absurd," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. The bailiff's hand closed around Jamie's arm, but before he could be led away, Mr. Reeves stepped forward. "Your Honor, if the young man has relevant evidence, shouldn't we at least—" "Counselor, you know better than to encourage this kind of disruption." Judge Harmon cut in. "With all due respect, Your Honor," Mr. Reeves persisted, "if there's exculpatory evidence, we have a duty to examine it, regardless of how unconventionally it's been presented." Judge Harmon's jaw tightened, but after a moment's consideration, he nodded curtly. "We'll take a 30-minute recess. Mr. Reeves, Miss Bennett, my chambers now." He turned his steely gaze to Jamie. "And you, young man, you'd better be ready to explain yourself." As the judge rose and the courtroom began to empty, Jamie caught his father's eye. David looked terrified, but beneath the fear was something else. A flicker of hope that hadn't been there before. 3 months earlier, Jamie Collins had been living the life of an ordinary high school junior, focused on maintaining his GPA, running cross-country, and occasionally helping out at his father's computer repair shop on weekends. The Collins family wasn't wealthy, but they were comfortable. Jamie's mother had died when he was 12, but he and his father had formed a tight unit, supporting each other through the grief and moving forward together. David Collins had always been Jamie's hero, a self-taught computer genius who had worked his way up from a repair technician to a senior IT security analyst at Quantum Dynamics, one of Boston's fastest-growing tech companies. David was honest to a fault, the kind of man who returned extra change at the grocery store and stayed late at work without claiming overtime. The first sign that something was wrong came on a rainy Tuesday morning in March. Jamie had been eating breakfast, scrolling through his phone, when the front door burst open. He looked up to see 3 FBI agents in dark suits enter their small apartment, followed by his father, whose face was ashen. "Dad." Jamie had stood up, his cereal forgotten. "What's going on?" But David couldn't meet his son's eyes. "Jamie, these men need to search the apartment. It's about work." One of the agents had approached Jamie, his expression professionally neutral. "Son, I'm Special Agent Morales. We have a warrant to search these premises. I need you to sit down and stay out of the way." For the next 2 hours, Jamie had watched in stunned silence as the agents methodically went through their home, taking David's personal laptop, his external hard drives, and even a stack of notebooks from his desk. When they finally left, David sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. "They think I stole money from the company," he'd said, his voice hollow. $15 million, funneled through a series of offshore accounts. "That's crazy," Jamie had replied automatically. "You would never do that." David had looked up then, his eyes red-rimmed. "Of course I wouldn't. But they have evidence, Jamie. Transfers made under my security credentials. Records that make it look like I've been siphoning funds for months. But you didn't do it. No, I didn't. David's voice had cracked, but I don't know if I can prove that. The weeks that followed were a nightmare. David was formally charged with fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. He was suspended from Quantum Dynamics, and the story was splashed across local news, turning their once private lives into public spectacle. Neighbors who had been friendly for years suddenly became distant. Some of Jamie's classmates whispered behind his back, speculating about how the Collins family had spent the stolen millions. The only money they actually had was rapidly depleted by legal fees. Mr. Reeves was a good lawyer, but even he seemed skeptical of David's innocence at first. The evidence, he explained, was substantial security logs showing David's credentials accessing the financial systems at odd hours, email trails discussing the establishment of shell companies, and even a partial paper trail leading to an offshore account in David's name. I didn't do any of this. David had insisted during a meeting in Mr. Reeves' office. Someone must have used my credentials, planted those emails. Mr. Reeves had looked sympathetic but unconvinced. The prosecution has a witness who claims you bragged about having a plan to make yourself rich, and they have records of large cash withdrawals from your bank account in the weeks before your arrest. That was for Jamie's college fund. David had said desperately, I've been saving cash in a safe deposit box because I don't trust the markets right now. I can prove that. But as the case progressed, it became clear that proving David's innocence would be an uphill battle. The prosecution had built a compelling narrative. A skilled IT professional with financial troubles following his wife's death had used his technical expertise to embezzle funds, hiding the money in a complex web of offshore accounts. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that Jamie had been conducting his own investigation. It had started the night after his father's arrest, when Jamie couldn't sleep. He had been staring at the ceiling, replaying the day's events, when a thought struck him. If someone had framed his father, they would have needed intimate knowledge of both Quantum Dynamics' financial systems and David's security credentials. That narrowed the field of potential suspects considerably. The next day, while his father was meeting with Mr. Reeves, Jamie had borrowed his laptop, one the FBI hadn't seized, and begun researching Quantum Dynamics' executive team. His father had often spoken about his colleagues, but now Jamie was looking at them through the lens of suspicion. Eleanor Reynolds, the CFO, quickly caught his attention. A former Wall Street executive who had joined Quantum Dynamics 3 years ago, she had overseen a period of explosive growth for the company. But Jamie also discovered something his father had never mentioned before joining Quantum. Reynolds had been under investigation for financial irregularities at her previous company. The investigation had been dropped due to insufficient evidence, but the timing of her departure was suspicious. Digging deeper, Jamie had found articles about Reynolds' luxurious lifestyle, a waterfront mansion, a yacht, a private art collection, all seemingly beyond the means of even a well-paid CFO. He'd also discovered that she had connections to a wealth management firm in the Cayman Islands, the same jurisdiction where some of the embezzled funds had allegedly been routed. It wasn't proof, but it was enough to make Jamie suspicious. The problem was, he had no way to access Quantum Dynamics' internal systems to look for concrete evidence. Until he remembered Tyler Kim. Tyler was a classmate, a brilliant but socially awkward computer whiz who had once helped Jamie recover data from a corrupted hard drive. The two weren't close friends, but they shared a mutual respect. When Jamie had approached him after school, explaining the situation, Tyler had been skeptical. "You're talking about hacking into a corporate network," he'd said, pushing his glasses up his nose. "That's federal crime territory." "I'm not asking you to hack anything," Jamie had clarified. "I just need advice on how someone might have framed my dad. Like, could they have spoofed his security credentials, created fake email trails?" Tyler had hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's possible, especially if they had administrative access to the systems. Someone like the CFO? Definitely. But proving it would be almost impossible without access to the original logs, the unaltered ones." That conversation had planted a seed in Jamie's mind. If Eleanor Reynolds had framed his father, there had to be evidence somewhere. Original logs, unaltered emails, records of the real transactions. But how could he get to them? The answer had come from an unexpected source: his father's preliminary hearing. During the proceedings, the prosecution had presented screenshots of the allegedly fraudulent transactions, and Jamie had noticed something odd. In the corner of one image was a partial view of the file path. QD Fesso 3 Finances Secure Backups. That night, Jamie had called Tyler again. What if the unaltered logs still exist on Quantum's servers? In a secure backup folder, Tyler had sounded alarmed. Jamie, what are you thinking? I'm thinking my dad's entire life is being destroyed by a lie, and the truth is sitting on a server somewhere. Even if that's true, how would you access it? You don't have credentials for their network. Jamie had paused, then said quietly, but my dad does, and I know all his passwords. Tyler's voice had dropped to a whisper. That's still unauthorized access. It's still a crime. Is it a crime to use my dad's credentials to access files that might prove his innocence? He'd do it himself if he could. Tyler hadn't answered immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was resigned. And I mean if someone were to attempt this, they'd need to be extremely careful. Use a secure connection, leave no traces. Would you help with that part? Just the security, not the actual access. Another long pause. Meet me at the library tomorrow. Bring a clean laptop. The plan they had developed was risky but simple. Jamie would use his father's VPN credentials to access the Quantum Dynamics network remotely, then navigate to the secure backup folder to search for the original unaltered logs. Tyler would provide a secure connection and help cover their digital tracks. 2 nights later, after his father had gone to sleep, Jamie had set up in his bedroom, a borrowed laptop connecting to Quantum's network through layers of security that Tyler had helped establish. His heart had pounded as the VPN connected and the familiar Quantum Dynamics login screen appeared. With trembling fingers, he'd entered his father's credentials, holding his breath until the system granted access. Following Tyler's instructions, he navigated carefully through the file structure, eventually finding the secure backups folder. It was encrypted, but his father's security level provided access. What he found inside had made his blood run cold. There were indeed backup logs of all financial transactions, both the official versions and what appeared to be the true originals. The differences were subtle but damning. Transactions that allegedly showed his father transferring funds to offshore accounts had been altered. The original log showed those same transactions originating from Eleanor Reynolds' terminal. There was more, emails between Reynolds and someone identified only as M, discussing the need to find a suitable scapegoat for financial irregularities that were being investigated internally. David Collins' name appeared repeatedly, with Reynolds noting his access to critical systems and his naive honesty, making him perfect for our purposes. Jamie had worked through the night, carefully copying files to an encrypted flash drive while taking screenshots of everything he found. By morning, he had amassed what he believed was irrefutable evidence of his father's innocence and Eleanor Reynolds' guilt. But what to do with it? He couldn't simply hand it over to Mr. Reeves or the police without revealing how he'd obtained it. The evidence might be thrown out, and Jamie himself could face charges for unauthorized access to Quantum systems. He had agonized over this question for weeks as his father's case moved toward trial. He had tried to drop anonymous hints to Mr. Reeves, suggesting lines of investigation that might lead to the same discoveries Jamie had made, but the attorney was focused on building a defense based on character witnesses and reasonable doubt. As the trial date approached, Jamie had grown increasingly desperate. The prosecution's case was strong, and Mr. Reeves seemed to be preparing for a plea deal rather than an acquittal. That's when Jamie had made his decision. He would bring the evidence directly to the courtroom, consequences be damned. Which led to this moment, standing in Judge Harmon's chambers, the flash drive clutched tightly in his hand as the judge, Ms. Bennett, and Mr. Reeves stared at him with varying degrees of disbelief and suspicion. "All right, Mr. Collins," Judge Harmon said, leaning back in his chair. "You've disrupted my courtroom and made serious allegations against a key witness. Now explain yourself." Jamie took a deep breath. "Your Honor, my father is innocent. He didn't embezzle any money from Quantum Dynamics. He was framed by Eleanor Reynolds, who used his security credentials to make it look like he was responsible for the transfers." Ms. Bennett scoffed. "And you expect us to believe you have evidence of this?" Jamie held up the flash drive. "It's all here. The original transaction logs, showing the transfers actually came from Ms. Reynolds' terminal. Emails between her and someone called M discussing how they needed a scapegoat. Even records of offshore accounts that she controls, not my dad." Mr. Reeves leaned forward, suddenly interested. "How did you obtain this evidence, Jamie?" This was the moment Jamie had been dreading. He hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. "I found a way to access Quantum's backup servers. The company keeps secure backups of all transactions and communications. The original unaltered records are still there." Ms. Bennett's eyes narrowed. "You're admitting to illegally accessing a corporate network." I'm admitting to using my father's own credentials. Credentials he gave me for emergencies. To find evidence that proves his innocence. Evidence that the prosecution either missed or ignored. Judge Harmon raised a hand to silence Ms. Bennett's protest. Let's set aside the matter of how this evidence was obtained for the moment. Ms. Bennett, Mr. Reeves, I want both of you to review what's on this drive. If there is exculpatory evidence, it needs to be evaluated, regardless of its provenance. Your Honor, Ms. Bennett objected. Evidence obtained illegally. I'm aware of the legal principles at play, Counselor. Judge Harmon cut in. But I'm also aware of my obligation to ensure justice is served. We'll have IT forensics examine the drive to verify its contents and determine if further investigation is warranted. Jamie felt a glimmer of hope, but it was quickly tempered by the judge's next words. Young man, while I appreciate your desire to help your father, what you've done could have serious consequences. I'm ordering you to remain available to the court. Don't leave town and don't access any more computer systems without authorization. Are we clear? Jamie nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Good. Now I'm going to recess this trial pending review of this new evidence. Mr. Reeves, you'll keep your client advised of developments. Ms. Bennett, I expect the prosecution to cooperate fully with the investigation of these allegations. As they left the judge's chambers, Mr. Reeves pulled Jamie aside. What you did was incredibly risky, he said in a low voice. If this evidence holds up, you may have saved your father. But if it doesn't, he left the thought unfinished, but Jamie understood the implication. If the evidence was discredited, or if the court decided it was inadmissible due to how it was obtained, he might have made his father's situation even worse. When they returned to the courtroom, Judge Harmon announced the recess and explained that new evidence had come to light that required further investigation. David Collins was released on his own recognizance, with strict instructions not to leave the state or attempt to contact anyone at Quantum Dynamics. As they left the courthouse, Jamie noticed Eleanor Reynolds being escorted to a separate room by two serious-looking men who appeared to be federal agents. She caught his eye as she passed, and the look she gave him was venomous. The ride home was tense. David waited until they were inside their apartment before confronting his son. Jamie, what have you done? He asked, his voice a mixture of awe and terror. Jamie sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. What I had to. They were going to convict you, Dad. Reynolds set you up and I found proof. By hacking into Quantum systems. Using my credentials. David ran a hand through his hair. Do you have any idea how serious that is? Not as serious as letting you go to prison for something you didn't do. David sat down beside his son, his anger deflating. How did you figure it out? That it was Eleanor. Jamie explained his investigation, from the research into Reynolds' background to the discovery of the secure backup folder. David listened in silence, his expression shifting from concern to grudging admiration. You always were too smart for your own good, he said finally. But Jamie, if they decide this evidence is inadmissible, then we'll find another way to prove your innocence. Jamie insisted. At least now they're looking at Reynolds instead of just focusing on you. David sighed heavily. I hope you're right. For both our sakes. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. FBI agents interviewed Jamie about the evidence he had found, carefully documenting his explanation of how the transaction logs had been altered and how Reynolds' emails implicated her in the embezzlement scheme. They were particularly interested in the identity of M. Reynolds' co-conspirator. Mr. Reeves called daily with updates. The forensics team had verified the authenticity of the files on Jamie's flash drive. They had also obtained a warrant to conduct a more thorough examination of Quantum Dynamics servers, where they found additional evidence supporting Jamie's claims. Reynolds herself had been brought in for questioning, but had refused to cooperate, hiring a high-powered defense attorney and denouncing the evidence as fabricated. However, her position weakened significantly when investigators discovered a connection between her private email account and a wealth management firm in the Cayman Islands. The same firm that had been used to hide the embezzled funds. A week after Jamie's courtroom revelation, Mr. Reeves arrived at their apartment with news the charges against David Collins had been dropped. The prosecutor's office was now building a case against Eleanor Reynolds instead. It's over, Jamie asked, hardly daring to believe it. The criminal charges, yes, Mr. Reeves confirmed, though there may be some civil matters to address with Quantum Dynamics. What about Jamie? David asked. Will he face charges for accessing the system? Mr. Reeves smiled slightly. The FBI has decided not to pursue charges, given the circumstances and the fact that the access was limited to finding evidence of a crime. However, He turned to Jamie with a serious expression. I wouldn't make a habit of this sort of vigilante investigation. Jamie nodded, relief washing over him. I won't need to now that Dad's cleared. Not entirely cleared, Mr. Reeves cautioned. The damage to his reputation will take time to repair, but Quantum's CEO has already reached out about the possibility of reinstatement with back pay. David looked stunned. They want me back. Apparently, they're in need of someone to overhaul their security systems, Mr. Reeves said with a wry smile. And they're impressed by your loyalty, despite everything that happened. Later that evening, as Jamie was helping his father sort through weeks of neglected mail, the doorbell rang. David opened it to find Special Agent Morales, the FBI agent who had led the original search of their apartment. Mr. Collins, Morales nodded. May I come in? There's something I think you and your son should know. David hesitated, then stepped aside. Morales entered, declining the offer of coffee, and got straight to the point. We've identified him, he said. The person who was working with Eleanor Reynolds. Jamie and David exchanged a glance. Who is it? David asked. Martin Graves, Quantum's former chief legal officer. He left the company 6 months ago, supposedly for health reasons. Jamie frowned. I don't remember Dad mentioning him. We didn't interact much, David explained. He handled the legal side of things, mostly working with the executive team. Morales nodded. According to what we've discovered, Graves and Reynolds had been embezzling funds for nearly 2 years. When internal audits started raising red flags, they needed a scapegoat. That's where you came in, Mr. Collins. But why me specifically? David asked. Your position gave you access to the systems they needed, and you had no powerful allies within the company to protect you. Plus, Morales added grimly, Reynolds apparently believed your personal circumstances made you a believable suspect. My personal circumstances, David repeated. Your wife's death, the financial strain of being a single parent. They thought investigators would accept that you were desperate enough to steal. David's jaw tightened. They used Sarah's death as part of their cover story. I'm afraid so, Morales confirmed. We've located Graves in Luxembourg. Extradition proceedings are already underway. After Morales left, David sat in silence for a long time processing the news. Jamie watched him, unsure what to say. Dade, he finally ventured. Are you okay? David looked up, his eyes troubled. They used what happened to your mother as part of their plan, as if her death was just a convenient detail. Jamie moved to sit beside his father. They're horrible people, but they didn't get away with it. Because of you? David said softly. You saw through their plan when no one else did. You risked everything to find the truth. Jamie shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. I just couldn't let them win. David put an arm around his son's shoulders. Your mother would have been so proud of you. I know I am. The months that followed brought a gradual return to normalcy. David was reinstated at Quantum Dynamics with a promotion to Chief Security Officer, tasked with rebuilding the company's damaged reputation. The embezzled funds were mostly recovered, though the legal proceedings against Reynolds and Graves promised to drag on for some time. Jamie returned to school, where his status shifted from son of an alleged embezzler to something approaching minor celebrity. The story had made local headlines, portraying him as a teenage detective who had outwitted corporate criminals. It was embarrassing, but certainly better than the whispers and sidelong glances he had endured before. Tyler Kim, whose technical assistance had been crucial to Jamie's investigation, became a close friend. The two began collaborating on legitimate cybersecurity projects, with Tyler's programming skills complementing Jamie's growing interest in digital forensics. One afternoon in late summer, as Jamie was preparing for his senior year, a letter arrived from Boston College, one of the schools he had applied to before his father's arrest, when their financial future had seemed secure. He opened it with low expectations, assuming it was a standard rejection. Instead, he found an offer of a full scholarship to the university's computer science program, with a focus on cybersecurity. Attached was a personal note from the dean expressing admiration for Jamie's innovative approach to digital investigation and suggesting he would make an excellent addition to their program. Dad, Jamie called, his voice cracking with excitement. You need to see this? David read the letter, his expression shifting from surprise to pride. A full ride to BC. Jimmy, that's incredible. Did you have something to do with this? Jamie asked suspiciously. David shook his head. Not at all. But I'm not entirely surprised. Word gets around in the tech community, and what you did, well, it impressed a lot of people. Jamie stared at the letter, still processing. So all of this, the arrest, the trial, everything we went through, it actually helped me get into college. I wouldn't go that far. David laughed. But you took a terrible situation and showed extraordinary character, intelligence, and determination. Those are qualities schools value, and rightfully so. Jamie sat down, suddenly overwhelmed by the trajectory his life had taken. 6 months ago, he had been a normal high school student, worried about tests and track meets. Then his world had collapsed, forcing him to find strength and skills he hadn't known he possessed. Now here he was, holding a future he hadn't dared to imagine. "I keep thinking about that moment in the courtroom," he said quietly, when I stood up and interrupted the judge. "I was so scared, but I couldn't see any other way." "That took courage," David said, "more than most adults would have shown." "It wasn't just courage," Jamie admitted. "It was desperation. I couldn't lose you too, not after Mom." His voice caught on the last word. David moved to sit beside his son, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Your mother used to say that the true measure of a person isn't what happens to them, but how they respond to it. By that standard, you've measured up better than I could have ever hoped." Jamie smiled, blinking back unexpected tears. I think maybe this is what I'm supposed to do. Finding the truth when others can't see it. A digital detective," David suggested. "It suits you." Jamie looked down at the scholarship letter again, imagining the possibilities it represented. "Yeah," he said. "I think it does." In the weeks that followed, as summer gave way to fall, Jamie began to prepare for his future with a new sense of purpose. The trauma of his father's arrest and trial gradually receded, though it had left its mark on both of them. David was more cautious, more aware of the corruption that could hide behind professional facades. Jamie was more confident, having discovered strengths he hadn't known he possessed. The final piece of closure came in October, when Eleanor Reynolds and Martin Graves both pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for returning the embezzled funds. The news reached Jamie as he was working on his college applications, crafting an essay about his experience that seemed almost too dramatic to be believable. "They got off too easy," he remarked to his father that evening. David shrugged, looking more peaceful than he had in months, maybe. But they lost their careers, their reputations, probably most of their assets. And we're still here, still together, still moving forward. Jamie considered this, then nodded slowly. "I guess that's what really matters in the end." "Exactly," David agreed. "Though I have to say I wouldn't mind if your next investigation was a bit less personal." Jamie laughed. "No promises. But next time, I'll try to get actual authorization before accessing any servers." David groaned, but there was amusement in his eyes. "That's my boy, always with the loopholes." As they sat together, discussing Jamie's college plans and David's new role at Quantum, the shadow of the past few months seemed to lift a little more. The path ahead wasn't perfectly clear. Life rarely offered that kind of certainty, but they would face it together, stronger for having weathered the storm. And Jamie, the accidental detective who had risked everything to save his father, found himself looking forward to the next challenge with an unexpected sense of anticipation. He had discovered not just his abilities, but his calling to stand as a witness for those who couldn't speak for themselves, to find the truth hidden in the silent language of data, to bring light to the darkest corners of the digital world. It wasn't the future he had imagined for himself, but somehow it felt right. It felt like home. The following spring, as Jamie prepared for his high school graduation, a different kind of letter arrived, one with the FBI seal emblazoned on the envelope. Inside was an invitation to apply for the Bureau's intern program for college students, with a personal note from Agent Morales expressing interest in Jamie's unique perspective and demonstrated aptitude for investigative work. "The FBI," David said when Jamie showed him the letter. "That's unexpected." Jamie studied the invitation, conflicted. "I'm not sure how I feel about it. After everything that happened, they did eventually get to the truth," David pointed out. "With your help, of course." "Yeah, but only after they were ready to send you to prison based on fabricated evidence." David sighed. "The system isn't perfect, Jamie, but maybe that's exactly why they need people like you, people who question assumptions and look beyond the obvious." Jamie considered this. "Maybe. But I think I'd rather finish college first, develop my skills independently before deciding whether to work within the system or, I don't know, start my own cybersecurity firm or something." "That's probably wise," David agreed. "Though I have to say, Special Agent Collins has a nice ring to it." Jamie rolled his eyes, but the idea planted a seed in his mind. Despite his initial reluctance, he could see the appeal of having the resources and authority of the FBI behind him in his pursuit of digital justice. But his father was right. There was time to decide, time to learn and grow before committing to any particular path. Graduation day arrived with unexpected poignancy, as Jamie sat among his classmates in their blue caps and gowns, listening to the principal's speech about new beginnings. He found himself scanning the audience for his father's face. David was there in the third row, beaming with pride, but there was an empty seat beside him where Jamie's mother should have been. The loss hit him anew, a bittersweet ache that had become familiar over the years. He wished she could have seen this moment, could have known about his scholarship, his plans for the future. Most of all, he wished she could have seen how he had protected his father when it mattered most. After the ceremony, as families gathered to take photos and offer congratulations, Jamie was surprised to see Tyler Kim approaching with his parents. "We wanted to congratulate you," Tyler said, adjusting his glasses nervously. "And, my dad has something he wants to ask you." Mr. Kim, a serious man in an impeccable suit, extended his hand. "Jamie, my son has told me about your remarkable skills and your interest in cybersecurity." Jamie shook his hand, shooting a questioning look at Tyler, who shrugged slightly. "I'm the head of security for Commonwealth Bank, Mr. Kim continued. "We're starting a summer internship program for promising students. Tyler suggested you might be interested." Jamie blinked in surprise. "An internship? At a bank? Financial institutions are prime targets for cyber criminals," Mr. Kim explained. "We need fresh perspectives, people who can think like both defenders and attackers. Based on what Tyler has told me, you fit that profile perfectly." Jamie glanced at his father, who nodded encouragingly. That's a really generous offer, Mr. Kim. "Thank you. Think about it," Mr. Kim said, handing Jamie a business card. "The position would provide valuable experience before you start at Boston College, and it pays well." After the Kims left, David clapped a hand on his son's shoulder. "Well, look at that. You're in demand." Jamie studied the business card, turning it over in his fingers. "It's a good opportunity, right? Working in bank security. Excellent experience?" David agreed, though slightly less dramatic than bringing down corporate embezzlers in federal court. Jamie laughed. "I think I've had enough drama for a while." But as they walked to the car, Jamie found himself wondering if that was true. The month since his father's exoneration had been quiet, focused on school and college preparations. Yet he sometimes caught himself missing the intensity of the investigation, the rush of connecting puzzle pieces that others had missed, the satisfaction of uncovering hidden truths. The summer internship at Commonwealth Bank proved more interesting than Jamie had anticipated. Financial cybersecurity was a complex field, constantly evolving as attackers developed new methods and defenders scrambled to keep pace. Under Mr. Kim's mentorship, Jamie learned about encryption, penetration testing, and transaction monitoring systems. He was particularly fascinated by the forensic side of the work, analyzing attack patterns to identify perpetrators and prevent future breaches. His experience with Eleanor Reynolds' embezzlement scheme gave him insights that surprised even the seasoned professionals on the security team. Where they saw abstract data points, Jamie saw human motivations, vulnerabilities, and deceptions. "You have good instincts," Mr. Kim told him one afternoon, after Jamie had correctly identified a potential insider threat that others had missed. "You understand that behind every unusual pattern, there's a person making choices." "I learned that the hard way," Jamie admitted. The internship ended in August, leaving Jamie with 2 weeks of free time before he started at Boston College. He had planned to spend the time helping his father set up their new apartment. David's reinstatement and promotion had come with a significant salary increase, allowing them to move to a more comfortable place in a quieter neighborhood. But on his last day at Commonwealth Bank, Jamie received an unexpected email from Tyler. "Check this out." Might be nothing, but it reminded me of the Reynolds case. Attached was a news article about a small tech startup called NextGen Solutions that had abruptly shut down, leaving investors confused and employees without final paychecks. The company's CEO, Richard Hartman, had issued a statement blaming catastrophic financial mismanagement by the company's recently departed CFO, Alicia Torres. Something about the story nagged at Jamie. He read it twice, then searched for more articles about NextGen. The pattern was disturbingly familiar: a relatively successful company, sudden financial trouble, a CFO blamed for everything. He even found a quote from Torres insisting she was being scapegoated. "This isn't about me," she told a reporter. "Someone needs to look at where the money actually went." Jamie stared at his screen, a chill running down his spine. It could be nothing. Financial mismanagement happened all the time in startups, but the parallels to his father's case were too striking to ignore. That evening, he showed the articles to David, who read them with growing concern. "It does sound familiar," David admitted. "But Jamie, we've been through enough. This isn't our problem to solve. I know, Jamie said, but what if Torres is innocent like you were? What if no one believes her either? David sighed, recognizing the determined look in his son's eyes. Just be careful, okay? Don't do anything that could jeopardize your future. Jamie nodded, but his mind was already racing ahead. His first step was obvious. He needed to talk to Alicia Torres. Finding her wasn't difficult. Unlike his father, who had retreated from public view during his ordeal, Torres seemed to be actively fighting back. She had given several interviews and maintained a professional LinkedIn profile. A few discreet messages later, positioning himself as a student researcher interested in corporate finance ethics, Jamie had secured a meeting at a coffee shop near Torres' apartment. She arrived precisely on time, a tall woman with sharp features and wary eyes. She was younger than Jamie had expected, maybe in her early 30s, wearing a crisp blazer that suggested she hadn't given up on her professional identity despite recent events. "So," she said after they'd exchanged greetings and ordered coffee, "you're writing a paper on corporate scapegoating. Why my case specifically?" Jamie had prepared for this question. It presents interesting ethical questions. A CFO is accused of mismanagement, denies responsibility, suggests deeper issues. I'm curious about the dynamics at play. Torres studied him, skepticism evident in her expression. "You seem young for a graduate student." "I'm actually starting undergrad this fall," Jamie admitted, "but I have personal experience with similar situations. My father was falsely accused of embezzlement at his company." Torres' demeanor shifted subtly. "The quantum dynamics case. I read about that. Your father was cleared, wasn't he?" Jamie nodded. "After we found evidence he was being framed. That's why your story caught my attention. There are similarities." Torres leaned forward, her coffee forgotten. "You think I'm being framed? Based on what?" "Just patterns, so far," Jamie said carefully. "But I'd like to hear your side. What really happened at NextGen?" For a moment, Torres seemed to debate whether to trust him. Then she sighed. "NextGen was my dream job, a promising startup with solid technology and good leadership. Or so I thought. I was hired 8 months ago to prepare the company for a Series B funding round. But when I started digging into the financials, things didn't add up." "What kind of discrepancies?" Jamie asked. "Yoon explained expenses, investments that couldn't be properly traced. I brought my concerns to Richard Hartman, the CEO, who assured me it was just messy bookkeeping from the company's early days." She paused, her mouth twisting bitterly. "I should have known better, but I wanted to believe him. I spent weeks reconstructing the financial trail, and what I found..." She trailed off. "What did you find?" Jamie prompted gently. "Evidence that Hartman and the CTO, Marcus Webb, had been siphoning investor funds to a separate project, an unrelated company they'd established on the side. They were essentially using NextGen as a funding vehicle for their real interest." Torres took a sip of her coffee, her hand trembling slightly. "When I confronted Hartman, he fired me on the spot. 2 weeks later, NextGen announced it was shutting down, and somehow I became the villain of the story." Jamie's pulse quickened. The parallels to his father's case were undeniable. "Do you have any proof?" "Documents, emails." Torres shook her head. "They locked me out of all systems immediately. The only things I have are some notes and a few screenshots I took while investigating, but nothing concrete enough for legal action. My word against theirs, and they've made sure my word isn't worth much these days." "What about the side company? The one they were funding?" "Helix Technologies," Torres said. "Officially, it doesn't exist yet, but I found transfer records, patent applications being prepared. They're developing some kind of advanced encryption system. That's all I know." Jamie took out a notebook, jotting down the name. "Have you gone to the police?" "The SEC? With what?" "Suspicions and a few screenshots." Torres laughed humorlessly. "I tried. They basically patted me on the head and said they'd look into it, but without solid evidence." She shrugged. Jamie felt a familiar determination rising within him. What if someone could find that evidence? Torres studied him more carefully now. "Someone like you mean, the teenage detective who cracked the quantum case." Her tone wasn't mocking, just cautious. "Why would you get involved in this?" "Because I know what it's like to watch someone you care about be destroyed by lies," Jamie said simply. "And because I might be able to help." Torres was silent for a long moment. "Look, I appreciate the interest, but this isn't your fight. These people, they're not just white-collar criminals. When I started asking questions, I received threats. My apartment was broken into. Nothing was taken, but the message was clear. All the more reason to expose them," Jamie argued. Torres shook her head. "You're what, 18? You have college starting soon. A future. I can't let you put that at risk." Jamie thought of his father saying almost the same thing. At least let me see what you have. The screenshots your notes. Maybe I'll spot something you missed. After more discussion, Torres reluctantly agreed to share her limited evidence with Jamie. They exchanged contact information, and she promised to email him her files that evening. Just be careful, she warned as they parted ways. And if you don't find anything concrete within a week, promise me you'll walk away. Some battles aren't worth fighting. Jamie nodded, though he wasn't sure he could make that promise in good faith. As he headed home, his mind was already cataloging possible approaches, resources he might need. This time he wouldn't be starting from scratch. This time he had experience, contacts, and a clearer sense of what he was looking for. David was waiting when he got home, trying to appear casual but obviously concerned. How did it go? Jamie dropped onto the couch, suddenly tired. She's being set up, Dad. Just like you were. The CEO and CTO were embezzling funds for some side project, and when she started uncovering it, they made her the fall guy. David's expression grew serious. Jamie! I know what you're going to say. Jamie cut in. That it's not my problem, that I should focus on school, that it's too dangerous. All valid points, David said mildly. But you also know I can't just walk away, not if there's a chance I can help. David sighed. Sitting down beside his son, you're right. I do know that. It's who you are, who your mother was too, actually. She could never ignore someone in trouble. He paused, considering. So what's your plan? Jamie blinked, surprised by the lack of resistance. I'm not sure yet. Torres is sending me what evidence she has, but it's not much. I need to find a way to access NextGen's financial records, communications between Hartman and Webb. Without breaking any laws this time, David added firmly. Ideally, yes. Jamie rubbed his temples, but I'm not sure how. David was quiet for a moment. What if there was a legal way to access at least some of that information? Jamie looked up. What do you mean? NextGen's investors, they've lost money because of this supposed mismanagement. They have a legal right to certain information about how their funds were used. David leaned forward. If you could convince one of them to request a formal audit. Jamie's eyes widened as he followed his father's thinking. That could open up access to exactly what we need. But how would I approach an investor? Why would they listen to me? Well, David said slowly, during my case, Quantum's board hired an independent forensic accounting firm to verify the extent of the embezzlement. That firm might still be working on the case, especially if they're trying to recover assets. And if they are, Jamie continued, catching on, they'd have an interest in any connection to other financial frauds. David nodded. Exactly. It might be worth reaching out to them, presenting what you know. If they see merit in it, they could pursue official channels that wouldn't require you to bend any rules. Jamie considered this approach. It was more cautious than he would have chosen on his own, but also potentially more effective in the long run. Do you know which firm Quantum used? Bergman and Associates, David replied. I met the lead investigator a few times during the proceedings. Sarah Bergman. Sharp woman, very thorough. Not easily fooled. Would she meet with me, do you think? David smiled. I could make a call. She did mention being impressed by your detective work once the full story came out. The following afternoon, Jamie found himself in the downtown offices of Bergman and Associates, seated across from Sarah Bergman herself. She was a formidable presence, tall, impeccably dressed, with keen eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they observed. David's son, she said, offering a firm handshake. I've been looking forward to meeting you properly. Your work on your father's case was unorthodox, but undeniably effective. Thank you, Jamie said, trying to project confidence. I appreciate you seeing me on such short notice. Your father said it was important. I owe him that much, considering what he went through. She gestured to a chair. So, tell me about this NextGen situation that's caught your attention. Jamie presented what he knew as clearly and concisely as possible. Conscious that Sarah Bergman's time was valuable, he outlined the parallels to his father's case, shared the information Torres had provided, and explained his theory about Helix Technologies being the destination for the embezzled funds. Bergman listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. When Jamie finished, she leaned back in her chair, studying him with renewed interest. You've done your homework, she acknowledged, and your instincts are good. There are definitely red flags here. Then you'll look into it, Jamie asked hopefully. It so happens, Bergman said, that we are already involved in a manner of speaking. Two of NextGen's largest investors have retained us to investigate the company's collapse and determine if there was actual fraud rather than mere mismanagement. Jamie's pulse quickened. Have you found anything? We're in the preliminary stages. But I can tell you that we've encountered some of the same irregularities you've mentioned. She tapped her pen against her notepad. What intrigues me is this Helix Technologies angle. It wasn't on our radar. Tors said they were developing an encryption system. Jamie offered. Bergman nodded thoughtfully. Intellectual property theft disguised as business failure. It's not uncommon in the tech world. The founders develop something valuable using investor funds, then orchestrate a company collapse, blame someone else, and walk away with the valuable IP. Exactly. Jamie leaned forward eagerly. That's what I think happened. The question is, Bergman continued, can we prove it? And this is where your involvement becomes problematic, Jamie. As a private citizen, especially one with your history, you can't access the systems and records we'd need. But you can, Jamie pointed out. Through proper channels, yes, with court orders and formal processes. She studied him closely. What exactly are you proposing? Jamie chose his words carefully. I'd like to help with the investigation. Not by accessing anything illegally, but by analyzing whatever data you can legally obtain. I have a perspective on this kind of fraud that might be valuable. Because you've seen it before, Bergman supplied. Yes, and because I understand how people like Hartman think, how they hide their tracks. Bergman considered this for a long moment. What about college? Your father mentioned you're starting at Boston College soon. I have 2 weeks before orientation, Jamie said. And even after that I could help part-time. Bergman tapped her pen again, then appeared to reach a decision. Here's what I can offer. We have a student internship program, mostly for law and accounting students, but we've made exceptions before. You would be officially classified as a research assistant, working under my direct supervision. Everything by the book. Jamie's eyes widened. You're offering me a job, a temporary position, Bergman clarified, with very specific parameters. You would only work on this case only with materials I provide, and you would follow my instructions exactly. One step outside those boundaries, and you're done. Completely, Jamie agreed quickly. When can I start? Bergman actually smiled at that. Tomorrow morning 9 a.m. I'll have HR prepare the paperwork. Don't be late. Jamie left Bergman's office feeling as though he'd just navigated a hurricane and somehow emerged intact. His father had been right. This approach was better than trying to investigate alone. He now had legal access, professional resources, and the protection of working within a legitimate framework. That evening, he called Alicia Tors to update her. You got Bergman and Associates involved, she asked, clearly impressed. That's actually significant. They're one of the best forensic accounting firms in the country. They were already investigating for some investors. Jamie explained, I just added your information to what they had. And now I'll be working with them, helping to analyze the evidence. Torres was quiet for a moment. I didn't expect you to make actual progress, she admitted. I thought you'd look at my materials, realize there wasn't enough to go on, and give up. That's not really my style, Jamie said. So I'm learning. There was a new warmth in her voice. Keep me updated, will you? And, Jamie, thank you. Even if nothing comes of this, it means a lot that someone believes me. The next 2 weeks were a crash course in professional investigation. Jamie reported to Bergman and Associates each morning, was assigned to a small workspace, and began sifting through financial records, emails, and corporate documents that the firm had legally obtained from NextGen servers and cloud storage. Sarah Bergman proved to be an exacting but fair mentor. She insisted on meticulous documentation of every finding, clear chains of evidence, and solid reasoning behind any conclusions. But she also valued Jamie's insights, particularly when he identified patterns similar to those in the quantum dynamics case. The breakthrough came 3 days before Jamie was due to move into his college dormitory. He had been reviewing email exchanges between Richard Hartman and various contractors when he noticed something odd. Recurring payments to a consulting firm called Paradigm Solutions for encryption research and development. This doesn't make sense, he told Bergman, showing her the emails and payment records. NextGen was developing a platform for healthcare data management. Why would they need advanced encryption beyond industry standards? Bergman skimmed the documents, her expression sharpening. Good catch. Let's see if we can find out more about Paradigm Solutions. A quick search revealed that Paradigm had been established just 6 months earlier, with minimal online presence and no listed clients besides NextGen. Its corporate registration listed Marcus Webb, NextGen's CTO, as a silent partner. There's our connection, Bergman said. Webb created a shell company to funnel NextGen funds into their encryption work. The question is, was Hartman involved as well? Jamie dug deeper into the email archives, looking for any direct communication between Hartman and Paradigm. Instead, he found something even more damning: a draft agreement between Hartman, Webb, and a third party for the formation of Helix Technologies, with explicit reference to leveraging proprietary encryption algorithms developed under Paradigm. They were using investor money to develop the technology, Jamie said, then planning to abandon NextGen and launch Helix with the finished product. They needed Torres gone because she was getting too close to figuring it out. Bergman nodded, already reaching for her phone. I need to inform our clients immediately. This changes everything. Events moved quickly after that. Bergman and Associates prepared a comprehensive report for NextGen's investors documenting the fraud. The investors filed formal complaints with the SEC and local authorities. Within days, both Hartman and Webb were under investigation, their assets frozen pending further proceedings. Jamie followed the developments with a mixture of satisfaction and disbelief. His instincts had been right, and this time, the system was working as it should, methodically building a case against the actual perpetrators rather than accepting a convenient scapegoat. The day before he was set to move into his dorm at Boston College, Jamie met with Alicia Torres one last time at the same coffee shop where they'd first talked. They're saying I've been officially exonerated. Torres told him, a hint of wonder in her voice. As if I needed to be exonerated from something I didn't do. She shook her head. But it's a relief all the same. What will you do now? Jamie asked. I've already had 3 job offers, she said, smiling for the first time since he'd met her. Turns out, being the whistleblower in a high-profile fraud case makes you attractive to companies that value ethical financial management, and Sarah Bergman has been surprisingly helpful with recommendations. I'm glad, Jamie said sincerely. Torres studied him over the rim of her coffee cup. And what about you? Off to become a cybersecurity expert, I hear. That's the plan. With a side gig in corporate crime fighting. There was gentle teasing in her tone. Jamie laughed. I'm hoping for a slightly quieter college experience, actually. Enough drama for a while. Torres nodded understandingly. Well, if you ever need a reference for internships or jobs in the financial sector, you've got one. What you did. She paused, choosing her words carefully. People like Hartman and Webb, they count on no one looking too closely, on everyone accepting the obvious narrative. You didn't do that. You questioned, you investigated, you persisted. That's rare, Jamie, and valuable. Later that evening, as Jamie finished packing for his move to campus, David leaned against the doorframe of his bedroom, watching his son with a thoughtful expression. 2 corporate fraud cases before your 18th birthday, he remarked. That has to be some kind of record. Jamie grinned as he folded a T-shirt. Let's hope it's not a trend. I don't know, David mused. You seem to have found your calling. First my case, now Torres. There's something to be said for specialized expertise. I got lucky, Jamie insisted. Both times. David shook his head. It wasn't luck. It was insight, determination, and courage. The same qualities your mother had. He paused, an unexpected catch in his voice. She would have been so proud of the man you're becoming, Jamie. Jamie stopped packing, the familiar ache of his mother's absence suddenly sharp again. I wish she could have seen it all. Been here for the court case, for graduation, for college, all. She is here, David said softly. And you, in everything you do. Jamie nodded, not trusting himself to speak for a moment. Then he cleared his throat. I keep thinking about something Torres said today, about people like Hartman and Reynolds counting on no one looking too closely at their stories. And I'm good at looking closely, at seeing the patterns others miss. Jamie sat on the edge of his bed. When I started investigating your case, it was out of desperation. With Torres, it was because I recognized something familiar. But what if this is actually something I could do? Help people who've been wrongly accused, expose financial crimes. David considered this. There are career paths that involve exactly that. Law enforcement, regulatory agencies, firms like Bergman's, or something more independent, Jamie suggested. A consultant maybe, or a specialist who works with defense attorneys on cases like yours. The silent witness, David said with a small smile. Finding the truth hidden in the data. Jamie looked up, struck by the phrase. I like that. Just promise me one thing, David said, his tone growing more serious. Whatever path you choose, remember that the evidence, the technology, they're just tools. It's the human element that matters most. The lives affected, the truth buried, the justice needed. Never lose sight of that. I won't, Jamie promised. The next morning, as they loaded the last of Jamie's belongings into the car for the drive to Boston College, a package arrived at their door. Inside was a small carved wooden box with a note from Sarah Bergman. For the consultancy you'll inevitably start someday. I expect great things. Inside the box was a business card holder, elegantly crafted from polished mahogany, and printed on a single sample card were the words, JME Cully, C1T Digital Forensics and Investigation. Jamie held it up, laughing in disbelief. She's presumptuous. She's perceptive, David corrected, examining the card with approval. And these will keep until you're ready for them. Jamie tucked the box carefully into his backpack. It was premature, perhaps even a bit silly, but it felt right somehow, a tangible reminder of what he might become, of the path that had revealed itself through crisis and challenge. As they drove toward Boston and the beginning of a new chapter, Jamie found himself thinking not of the fraud cases or the investigations, but of the people whose lives had been changed. His father, restored to his rightful place, Alicia Torres, cleared of false accusations, even Eleanor Reynolds and Richard Hartman, facing the consequences of their actions at last. That was the true power of being a witness, not just to observe, but to ensure that the truth was seen and heard, to stand between the vulnerable and those who would exploit them. It was a responsibility, but also a privilege, one that Jamie Collins, the accidental detective turned deliberate justice seeker, was increasingly certain he wanted to bear. And somewhere he liked to think, his mother was watching, approving of the unexpected path her son had found, a path of courage, integrity, and unwavering commitment to the truth, no matter how deeply it might be buried or how fiercely guarded by those with wealth and power. The silent witness? It wasn't the future he had imagined, but as his father guided the car toward Boston and the campus that would be his home for the next 4 years, Jamie knew with quiet certainty that it was exactly who he was meant to be.